Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have a special guest with us today, Duncan Angove with us today, CEO at Blue Yonder in Duluth, Georgia. I'm in Oaxaca, Mexico. Duncan is a fine man, CEO at Blue Yonder since 2 years and 9 months, almost 3 years, co-founder and managing partner at Arc Spring, president at Infor, was a general manager and SVP at Oracle. So quite the impressive guy right there. I have a bunch of questions for him. This podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start a podcast with the help of AI, get great guests like Duncan and a bunch of connections, grow neurons at the same time, you can go to podfire.com. Duncan, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. Yes, so doing a lot of traveling. Supply chains have become very mainstream. And, I think before the pandemic, no one knew what they were. And they're obviously very, very important. So traveling around the world, meeting with very large companies, helping them understand how they can respond to all of this disruption with our software.
Right. And how did you get to that position? You had quite the accomplished career. That is probably your biggest one. What fit did they found into you? What's your special sauce and special skills?
So, I've always been interested in technology. I mean, from like the age of 12, I was actually coding. I was writing video computer games. And so I was always interested in technology. And what I liked about it was it really fed my imagination and my creativity. I'd look at like an old computer monitor. It was a blank screen with like a flashing green cursor. And, back then with video games, I could create worlds and games and entertainment. And then when I came out of university, I realized that there were jobs out there where you could actually write code to help solve real problems in the world, right? And every company you went to, whether it was a retailer or it was a semiconductor manufacturer or an automotive company, they had different problems, and you could use code to basically solve those problems in a really cool way. And I got into supply chain really, really early. My first job was implementing software in a warehouse on Oxford Street. And it was actually the basements of a department store. And then I just grew up in the business, just learned more and more about software and all of that. And then, was fortunate to become the CEO of Blue Yonder.
And how is AI evolving? How is Blue Yonder evolving in the AI age? And how are supply chains adapting to that?
So if you more broadly position AI, so let's call it like intelligence, right? The emergence of applying intelligence to business problems really started in supply chain. If you go all the way back to like the 1940s, something called linear programming, which is one of the very first solvers for solving extremely complex problems, came out of logistics, and then integer programming and all these different things. So it was always applied to the world of logistics and supply chains. Where do you send multiple trucks and all these inventory? So it's always been here. And sort of when machine learning and neural networks and all that first emerged, I mean, this was one of the first areas that it was applied, operations research, just because of the sheer volume and variety of data and the velocity at which supply chains move. It's where it's always sort of been applied. So, if you look at Blue Yonder today, in terms of, I call it like traditional AI, machine learning that you use to predict, demand or anything, we run 20 billion AI workloads a day in the cloud on behalf of some of the largest brands in the world, right? So that's sort of where that's sort of where digital intelligence went. And then this thing called Gen AI came along, and it was a different type of AI, right? It to that intelligence we already had, it added like reasoning and problem solving and creativity and those types of things. And it sort of evolved that digital intelligence. So it almost became more human-like. And we were able to apply that to a whole bunch of different problems in supply chain, that made it even faster.
Right. And supply chain is infinitely complex. Are you thinking of building on your own model, or do you still partner with big and leading LLMs nowadays?
Yeah, no, we won't build our own large language model. I mean, again, you saw the emergence of things like DeepSeek and just the pace at which these things evolve and the money that's involved in them. We don't need to. So, every time a new one comes out, we benchmark it, and we benchmark it against supply chain specific tests, like, other people do it against medicine and things like that. So there are a lot of tests out there where you can take an LLM and test it as a supply chain professional, ops research professional, those types of things. And then what does it do well? What does it do bad? So we're constantly testing them, but obviously there is an extension of it where we train it on our proprietary data, our proprietary intellectual property, to make it very, almost like you turn it into a supply chain polymath, a supply chain savant that is wired into the Blue Yonder systems, right? That's kind of what makes it different for us.
Right. And precisely for your end customer, what would the outcome look like using your software?
So supply chains are all about speed, right? I mean, and all the metrics we've used over time in supply chain, they're all oriented somehow in speed. It's on time and full. It's, everyone's heard about just in time. How fast are your turns, right? It's always about speed. And the faster you can make a supply chain run, the more precise you can make it run, it becomes resilient. It's able to respond to disruptions, tariffs. This supply is, this stuck his ship in the Suez. You become far more agile when you're able to move quickly. And fundamentally, that's what our software does with AI at the core of it. It allows our customers to run and orchestrate supply chains at machine speed and precision.
What are your top priorities this year as a CEO?
Well, the first thing is we're always focused on customer outcomes. And, we've been living for a while now, since before the pandemic, with a lot of uncertainty in supply chain. And, uncertainty is a difficult thing to deal with when you're trying to fulfill orders for consumers, or you're trying to build cars if you're an automotive manufacturer, so the first thing we're focused on is how can we leverage our software and our clients to navigate this uncertainty in a way where it doesn't damage their business. How do they take advantage of opportunities, and how do they navigate the risks that have emerged? AI plays a huge role in that, because obviously it's predicting and it's moving things quickly, and then having software that's joined up and gives you like incredibly good visibility around what's coming so that you can navigate it more effectively.
How did Blue Yonder navigate COVID, and what has been different in the supply chain since then?
I mean, I would say one thing that COVID exposed in supply chains was, if you go back over 30 years, I mean, first of all, it was dealing with a lot of long-term trends on sort of the demand side, how changing consumer behavior, whether it's personalization of a car, or it's e-commerce and retail, or it's ethical consumption, sustainability, all of those things that on the demand side have been reshaping a whole bunch of industries. It was sort of what COVID exposed on the supply side was the fragility of how supply chains were put together. China is the factory of the world, globalization, sort of as a platform, and this idea of just in time. And it sort of exposed the fragility and the lack of resilience in supply chains in responding to all of that. And it wasn't like after COVID was over, everyone was like, oh, great, that's done. I mean, then we had Suez, and then now we have an avian bird flu outbreak, and 19 million hens were killed, right? And now we've got tariffs. So there's a constant onslaught of uncertainty that's had companies step back and saying we need to rethink the way our supply chains are architected and how they operate, and then all of the software and technology that underpins them. We're very fortunate because at the very time all this business upheaval was happening, we had the emergence of really interesting technology, in particular generative AI, that we can use to solve some of these big problems. I mean, that's really what it is. I would say from a Blue Yonder perspective, like a lot of, we're a digital software company, so it's not like we have people showing up to factories and warehouses. So like most companies, we went to kind of a remote working model, but now we've sort of bounced back and we're sort of more hybrid now. There's definitely value in bringing people together for very purposeful reasons.
Right, and I think I read somewhere that 90% of warehouse staff are being replaced now, / in the next couple of years in Amazon and Walmart warehouses. Is that true? And how do these people pivot without the job being replaced by AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite that high a number. I mean, those would be at an Amazon or a highly automated facility with robots and conveyor belts and autonomous, vehicles, forklifts driving around. You can see a lot of that. but it obviously, the penetration of robots in warehouses in manufacturing, continues to grow. The emergence of AI again allows us to orchestrate all that in a much quicker way. The one thing I'll say is in the warehousing and logistics industry, just in the US, there is a massive shortage of workers. So it's not like this stuff is coming along and replacing jobs. There aren't enough people to fill these jobs already. So it's actually taking up the slack in terms of all of that. And like we've seen in the emergence of every new kind of revolutionary technology, people in the short term freak out. Like, we go back to the Luddites and all of this. But, it's a lot of the jobs that will exist in 10 years haven't been invented yet. And we see that with every new wave of technology, right? We don't need telephone operators anymore to route calls. It's done with software and AI. And very much the same thing will happen here. I think work over time gets elevated, right? The quality of what humans do will get elevated.
And is the only thing stopping a drone from delivering something to my door here regulations? Is that what we're fighting against to get that innovation to our door?
I mean, there are obviously some very successful trials going on. The regulatory environment doesn't move as quick. It doesn't move at the pace of innovation. It's a very good point, Charles, right? But there's also some kinks to work out, right? You know what I mean? And regulations in areas like that where it involves airspace and all of those things, those aren't things we want to get wrong. I mean, unfortunately, we saw what happened with a helicopter in Washington, D.C., right? I mean, that could easily have been a drone. So, we have to tread cautiously, but certainly sometimes regulations are bad and sometimes regulations are needed.
I had the CEO of Spot.ai on my podcast 2 weeks ago. What are you seeing in the future of AI being applied to vision, a camera that could film your whole supply chain, prevent work accident? Are you folks integrating with such companies right now?
Yes, so we've actually got a bunch of computer vision solutions already deployed in production. So an example of one of those would be, you think about a warehouse. It has trucks that come in, maybe 2,000 trucks a day, and there's 500 parking spots out in there. And before a truck can come into the parking area of a warehouse, it has to go through a gate, and a guard checks it, looks at the license plate, gives them the spot to go to. We've used computer vision for all of that. You don't need a gate guard anymore. The truck just drives straight through. The vision can see it. It can see all of that. It automatically routes the driver on his phone about where to park. We've got cameras in the parking lot that tells us when a dock door is open and now free and available and where the truck should go. So we're already using computer vision for that. And there are some really interesting use cases in stores where you can use a camera on your phone to basically check if the products are laid out properly in a particular category and communicate that back to corporate, where the merchants could say, hey, no, we said this and the store has done this, it's not set correctly. So there's a big opportunity for computer vision in supply chain software.
Can you walk me through your full GTM process at such a large enterprise? I believe you have around 7,000 employees. How do you folks do sales nowadays?
Yeah, so we are, we're up to 8,000 now, believe it or not, Charles. We're growing at a crazy pace just because of the demand that we're seeing in supply chain. And we have 3,000 customers, and they're really the largest blue chip brands in the world. So in retail, we have 76 of the top 100 global retailers. In the logistics industry, we have 28 of the top 50. So we deal with the very largest brands in the world that are really doing pretty important things. I like to think that a lot of the world supply chain runs on our software rails, right? So we obviously have very deep relationships with those customers. And our go-to-market model is very much of an advisory one, right? Supply chain software is bought by business people. It's not bought by technology people just because of its importance, So we've got a very much advisory, deep industry, supply chain domain type of people in the company. And they approach clients very much in an advisory role where we come in and we say, where are the opportunities? Have you thought about this? Here are the best practices that are informed across 3,000 companies that we've seen. And then we stay behind and we help actually deliver it. How do we land the business case? Did we land it or not? Why didn't we? Is it a training issue? Is it change management? Did we not configure the software properly? And then we look for the next piece of value. And that's basically how we built our go-to-market engine. I mean, 75% of our sales and revenue comes from our existing customers, right? Because we continue to deliver and then they want to do more with us.
I love that. What are your growth projections for the next couple of years?
We don't disclose them. We're not a public company yet, but suffice to say that as you can see from our employee growth, the business is growing at a double-digit clip. And one of the metrics that we really track that I'm proud of is how many customers do we take live, because that's when you've sold it and you've actually delivered it and they're actually getting value from it. And we take 5 customers a day live around the world. 5. It's a staggering number. I mean, 3 years ago that was 2. So 5 a day around the world. So I love that stat.
And generally, the economy, where do you see it going? There's Trump in power right now. I think we're seeing good effects from that, although not everyone will agree with the man. What are you seeing as global trends that could boost your company's growth?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a lot of uncertainty is probably the biggest concern that we have. And companies need certainty to make long-term investments, particularly big capital investments like building a manufacturing plant or building a warehouse, right? So that uncertainty and what that means for interest rates, all of those things creates a lot of uncertainty. That the tariff environment, again, it's a lot of uncertainty. When the CHIPS Act came out a few years ago, a lot of those companies built fabs in the US, and we had Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel, Micron, AMD. They all used our software to stand up those fabs, right? But if you look at a chip, the average chip has 72 border crossings in it. 72, right? So these supply chains are incredibly interlinked, and it's not quite as simple just to say, let's build a factory in this country, because the components that you need, I mean, where you ship it, how it comes back, I mean, it creates these are very, very complex, sophisticated supply chains, right? And all of these things have an impact on it.
And how do you personally adapt to that uncertainty? What's your number one way to steam off with the stress as a busy CEO?
I love being outdoors. So the only time you can guarantee to have to yourself is the very, very early hours of the morning. So I get up at 5:30 a.m. and the very first thing is pitch black outside, and I've got 2 dogs, and I take them for like a 45-minute walk. And before I leave the house, I kind of scan down my body, and I see your brain's all cluttered from a night of sleep, and you may be a little bit foggy, you know what I mean? And then when I come back after 45 minutes, and I don't take my phone with me, I'm not on the phone, I don't have headphones in, I'm experiencing the real world, I'm being present. I've read a lot of stuff on Zen. And when I come back, I scan my body, I'm like, wow, I just feel fantastic. So as painful as it is, I set my alarm, and I get up and I do that. I was in San Francisco for 2 days earlier this week, and I looked at it, and Starbucks opens at 4:30 a.m. where I was. And it's because all the financial traders there are trading on Wall Street, so they're on New York time. I was there at 4:30, so that's what I do.
There you go. And it's 12, 15 hours work on a daily basis, I would guess. At what time do you go to bed? Any habits to shut that brain of yours down?
Yeah. So I think it's particularly in a world where we've had remote work and it's been too easy to blur kind of your own time, your family time with work. You've got to create really strong boundaries, right? So I have my iPad next to me, and I'm on my computer right now. I do not mix work. There's no work email on my iPad. And when I open my iPad, I'm on my iPad, I'm not looking at work stuff, right? Otherwise, everything just starts to really, really blur, So you got to create boundaries.
Right. On the fitness level, do you also train? Do you also run? Sometimes, how do you take care of your body other than the 45 minutes walk?
I do. So at night, I mean, I'm not good at exercising in the morning. So at night, even if you're tired, it's a kind of a paradox. The more tired you are, the more important it is to go work out. And then you get your endorphins, your brain boots up, you know what I mean? So I have a hydro rowing machine. It's like the Peloton of rowing. It's fantastic. So I row on that. I have a Peloton that I bike on, and then sometimes I'll go outside and run. So I kind of try and mix up what I'm doing. And then anytime I'm on the road, I'm always out running or renting a bike. I'm leaving for London tonight, and I get there early tomorrow morning, and the first thing I'm going to do is run around Hyde Park just to boot the brain, boot the jet lag out of me, and then I go to a bunch of business meetings.
Yeah, I love that. And at night, there's no one. The silence of the night, the coldness of the night air is just epic. Yesterday, I got a nice uphill run and was crazy good. What are you reading nowadays? What are you feeding your brain with?
So I always, we have a kind of a behavior. We have values and behaviors at Blue Yonder. Behaviors are things that we think if we do all the time, it changes the DNA of the company. And one of them is be curious. So I read a lot about the end industries that we're in. We sell into the semiconductor space. So I read a book called Chip War, which is kind of the history of the silicon chip. It was really, really interesting. I just finished another book called The Life of the Automobile, which was literally the history of the brands and automotive manufacturers, again, which is a huge vertical for us. So I always try and have one fiction book that I'm reading at a time and then one factual book, and sometimes it's daunting. It looks like a really big book, but if all you do is read a chapter a day and the average chapter is only 30 pages, right? I mean, it's so that's basically what I do.
Right. I use a lot GPT for everything nowadays, including learning. And I have a fiction GPT, and I just feed it ideas about the AI future, and it comes back with crazy stories for the audience if they want to try that. You mentioned that the culture at the company. That's an important topic, sort of skipped. How do you identify your A+ players?
So we're the thing about this company, and I know it's a cliche, everyone says it, it's the people that make Blue Yonder. I mean, these are people that have been 20, 30 years in supply chain. And when we go in and advise with clients, I mean, they're like, okay, I want that person, and that person on my project, right? So we're very, very fortunate. And the thing that you'll find is once you start to have A players is they don't tolerate non-A players, right? So we're very, very fortunate from that perspective.
And how can these A+ players develop EQ? Because I often see IQ into these people. Same here, I'm high IQ, but EQ, I still need a lot of work. What are ways to get better at that? You seem to be high EQ, by the way.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I would say, first of all, our values are like inclusion, respect, empathy. You have to have all those things. They're sort of non-negotiable for us. We won't put up with an A player that's a jerk. That's not our culture. I don't care how good you perform. We won't tolerate that. That's a non-negotiable. But again, it comes back to our behaviors, right? Around being curious, acting with urgency. We're very big on say-do. It's not something the software industry's really been terribly good at, right? You actually have to deliver what you say you do. So that's a big part. That's really, really big part of what we do, all of those things. But EQ is important. We rolled out a training program this year. Well, not really a training program. It's more like a cultural reinforcement of say-do and acting with urgency. And the key is all around leadership, right? And you could be a leader of 2 people or a leader of 1,000 people. It's leadership makes the difference between winning and losing. So we rolled out a program around that, something called extreme ownership. And basically, even if your own people don't deliver, it's actually your fault, right? And then everyone just takes ownership for what happened.
One last question for the audience. Let's try that one. GS1 Sunrise 2027. What effect do you think this will have on the supply chain?
I mean, listen, the thing about supply chains and all the industries we're in and all the countries we're in is that there's a constant drumbeat of new regulation and new standards that come along. And supply chain in particular, as it relates to things like GS1, and we've had many other things like this, have always tried to create standards that make it easier for companies to operate with each other and supply chains to flow, more effectively. So, it's something that everyone's going to have to deal with.
Duncan, thank you so much. Where can people find out more about you?
BlueYonder.com. And
you also have a website, right? I was checking it.
Yeah, that's right.
Duncan Angove.com, Duncan's personal website. So thank you for